and I don't want to." She pulled back slightly, her forehead resting against mine. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into." "Maybe not," I admitted, "but I know what I feel, and I think you feel it too." Her eyes searched mine, and for a moment, I thought she might push me away. But then she smiled, a small, almost sad smile, and nodded. "You're impossible," she said, her voice tinged with both exasperation and affection. "Maybe," I said with a grin, "but you like me anyway." Helen laughed softly, the sound like music to my ears. She shook her head, her hair brushing against my cheek. "I don't know what to do with you." "Start with tonight," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes flickered to my lips, and she leaned in again, her kiss more confident this time. My hands moved to her waist, holding her close as the rest of the world faded away. I awoke to the soft light of dawn streaming through the window. Helen was gone, but the faint scent of her perfume lingered in the air, a reminder of everything that had happened the night before. I lay there for a while, replaying every moment in my mind. The way she looked at me, the way she kissed me, the way her touch had felt like fire against my skin. It didn't feel real, but it was. Eventually, I got up and made my way downstairs. Helen was in the kitchen, her back to me as she stood at the counter pouring herself a cup of coffee. She was wearing one of her usual casual outfits, a fitted blouse and jeans, but there was something different about her. "Morning," I said, my voice still groggy from sleep. She turned to look at me, her expression cautious but gentle. "Morning," she replied, her voice calm but with an undertone of tension. I walked over to the counter and poured myself a cup of coffee, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. "Last night," she began, her voice trailing off. I looked at her, waiting for her to continue. "It can't happen again, Lucas," she finally said, her eyes meeting mine. "Why not?" I asked, my voice calm. She sighed and put down her cup. "Because it's not right, because it's complicated, because ... because you're afraid," I said, cutting her off. Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment she didn't say anything. Then she let out a soft laugh and shook her head. "You're too smart for your own good, you know that?" "Maybe," I said with a small smile, "but I'm not wrong." She looked at me, her eyes softening. "No, you're not," she admitted. We stood in silence for a moment, the air between us charged with the weight of all that had gone unsaid. Finally, she reached out and brushed her hand against mine. "Lucas," she said softly, her voice shaking, "I don't know where this is going, but I can't lose you." "You won't," I said, squeezing her hand gently. "I promise." The days after that night were like walking a tightrope. Helen and I both knew that we'd crossed a line, one that couldn't be easily undone, but we also knew that we weren't ready to let go of what had begun between us. She kept her distance during the day, retreating to her usual routines, tending the garden, running errands, preparing dinner with a calm, almost rehearsed demeanor. But in the evenings, as the house grew quiet and shadows stretched across the walls, she'd find reasons to linger. It started small, an extra glass of wine after dinner, a casual conversation that stretched late into the night. The barriers we'd built during the day would dissolve, replaced by a tension neither of us wanted to acknowledge aloud. It was a Friday evening, and Dad was still out of town. I had just finished a late-night snack and was rinsing my plate in the sink when I heard the soft padding of footsteps behind me. "Still up?" Helen's voice was warm, but with a hint of curiosity. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, dressed in a simple tank top and lounge pants. Her hair was pulled back loosely, and she looked effortlessly beautiful, the soft kitchen light casting a warm glow on her features. "I couldn't sleep," I said, drying my hands with a towel. She came closer and reached into the cupboard for a glass. "You and your late-night habits," she teased, filling it with water. I leaned against the counter, watching her. There was something mesmerizing about the way she moved, graceful, confident, yet completely unassuming. "Do you ever think about leaving this place?" I asked suddenly, the question surprising even myself. Helen paused, her hand resting on the counter as she looked at me. Leaving? Why? I shrugged. I don't know. Sometimes it feels like there's more out there, you know? More than this town, this house, this life. She smiled faintly, her eyes pensive. I've thought about it, she admitted, but life has a way of keeping you where you are, even when you want to go. There was a wistfulness in her tone that made my chest tighten. I took a step closer, the distance between us shrinking. You don't have to stay where you're not happy, I said quietly. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment the air between us was thick with unspoken words. She set the glass down and turned to face me, her arms crossed loosely over her chest. What about you? She asked. What's keeping you here? You, I said without hesitation. The words hung in the air and her expression changed, a mixture of surprise and something deeper. She took a step back, her back pressed against the counter as I approached. Lucas, we can't… I know, I said, gently cutting her off, but I don't want to pretend that this isn't happening. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine. It's not that simple. Maybe it is, I said, my voice steady. You just have to let it be. Her breath caught as I reached out, my hand brushing against her arm. The touch was light, tentative, but it sent a shiver through both of us. She didn't pull away, her eyes locked with mine as I stepped closer. Lucas, her voice was barely above a whisper, and before she could say more, I leaned forward and my lips captured hers, in a kiss that was both tender and filled with unspoken longing. Her hands moved to my chest, not to push me away, but to steady herself as the kiss deepened. Her fingers curled around the fabric of my shirt, pulling me closer as her body pressed against mine. The cool edge of the counter dug into her back, but neither of us seemed to care. The world outside the kitchen faded away, leaving only the warmth of her touch and the fire between us. When we finally pulled apart, her cheeks were flushed, her breathing uneven. She looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and vulnerability. This is going to get us into so much trouble, she said, her voice shaking. Perhaps, I said, brushing a strand of hair from her face, but I'd risk it for you. She laughed softly and shook her head. You're impossible. And you're worth it, I said, my hand lingering on her cheek. For a moment, she just looked at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Then, with a small, resigned smile, she leaned in again, her lips finding mine in a kiss that said, everything words couldn't. It made the weekend feel like a bubble, separate from the real world where the rules didn't apply. Helen and I spent the days pretending everything was normal, but the evenings were ours. Stolen moments filled with whispered conversations and gentle touches. We'd sit on the sofa together, her head on my shoulder as we watched old films, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on my arm. Or we'd walk through the garden at dusk, the scent of roses filling the air as her hand brushed against mine, the simplest touch sending sparks through me. Every moment felt like a secret, something precious and fragile. And I knew it couldn't last. But for those 2 days, we let ourselves forget the consequences, lost in the warmth of each other's company. My name is Lucas. I'm 25 years old, and I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. Life here isn't particularly exciting. Rows of identical houses, neatly trimmed lawns, and neighbors who exchange polite waves but rarely stop to talk. It's the kind of place where you can hear the hum of a lawnmower on a Sunday morning or the faint bark of a dog from down the street. I live with my dad, Greg, and my stepmom, Helen. Dad's 58, a hard-working contractor who spends most of his time managing a local construction company. He's the kind of guy who's always on the move, rarely home before dinner, and even when he is, he's usually glued to his laptop answering emails or reviewing blueprints. Helen is something else entirely. She came into our lives about 5 years ago. My mum passed away when I was 16, cancer, and for a long time it was just Dad and me. We managed, but the house always felt empty. Dad didn't talk much about dating, and when he finally introduced Helen, it was a surprise to both of us. They'd met through mutual friends, and before I knew it, they were married. Helen is 47, although you'd never know it. She has that effortless grace about her, the kind that turns heads without even trying. Her hair is a rich auburn that falls in soft waves over her shoulders, and her eyes, God, her eyes are that piercing shade of green that can make you forget what you were saying if she looks at you for too long. She's always been kind to me, treating me more like a friend than a stepson, but there's always been this tension between us. I don't know when it started, but I know it's only gotten stronger over the years. Maybe it's the way she carries herself, confident yet approachable. Maybe it's the way her laugh fills the room, or the way she smiles when she catches me staring for a moment too long. Whatever it is, I can't ignore it. We live in a modest 2-story house, a sort of white picket fence with a small garden out front which Helen takes care of. She's always outside in the mornings, tending to her roses or pulling weeds, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, wearing those tight-fitting jeans that make it hard not to look. And then there's me. I work part-time at a local tech store, fixing phones and laptops, and I'm taking night classes to finish my degree in software engineering. Most days, when I'm not at work or school, I'm in my room playing video games or scrolling through my phone. It's not much of a life, but it's comfortable, or at least it was. That night, everything changed. It was a Thursday evening. Dad was away on one of his business trips, something that had become more frequent over the past year. Helen and I had settled into a comfortable routine whenever he was gone. She'd make dinner, we'd eat together, and then we'd retreat to our own spaces for the night. That evening, I was in my room, lying on my bed, phone in hand, scrolling through videos as I was full of desire and playing with myself. The soft glow of the lamp on my bedside table cast a warm light across the room, and a playlist of mellow acoustic songs played in the background. A gentle knock on my door broke the silence. "Lucas." Helen's voice was soft, almost hesitant. I was surprised because I had forgotten to lock my door. I was just thinking that when the door opened and there she was, standing in the doorway with that effortless grace she always seemed to have. She caught me playing and wearing nothing. "What are you doing?" she said, stepping inside and shutting the door behind her. "Nothing," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. She walked over and picked up my phone. My eyes followed her as she came closer, her presence commanding the room without even trying. She sat down on the edge of my bed, her movements slow and deliberate. The mattress dipped slightly, and suddenly the air felt heavier, charged with an unspoken tension. "You've grown so much," she said softly, her eyes meeting mine. There was something in her gaze, something warm yet searching. I swallowed hard, my heart quickening. "Yes, I suppose." She reached out and brushed a strand of hair from my forehead. The touch was light, but it sent a shiver down my spine. "Do you ever think about what you want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" "In life," she said, her eyes locked with mine. "What makes you happy? What do you want for yourself?" I hesitated, surprised by the question. "I don't know," I admitted. "I guess I've never really thought about it." Helen smiled, her hand lingering on my cheek for a moment before pulling it away. "You should. You deserve to be happy, Lucas." There was a pause, a silence that seemed to stretch endlessly between us. Her gaze softened, and before I could think, she moved closer. The kiss was tentative at first, her lips brushing against mine in a way that felt both hesitant and deliberate. My breath caught, and for a moment I didn't move, too stunned to react. But then something shifted. My hand reached up and cupped her cheek as I leaned into the kiss, deepening it. Her lips were soft, warm, and I could taste the wine we'd had for dinner. My heart raced as her hands moved to my shoulders, pulling me closer. The world outside seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of us in this small, intimate room. Her fingers trailed down my arms, her touch sending sparks through me. She pulled away slightly, her forehead resting on mine as we both caught our breath. "This is wrong," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Maybe," I said, my hand still on her cheek. "But it doesn't feel wrong." Her eyes searched mine, and for a moment it felt as if she might pull away. But then she leaned in again, her lips capturing mine with more urgency this time. My hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer, feeling the warmth of her body against mine. Her hands slid up my chest, her touch both gentle and firm, as if she had memorized every inch of me. It was a moment I knew I'd never forget, a moment that changed everything. Helen pulled away just enough to look at me, her green eyes filled with a mix of emotions. Desire, hesitation, and something deeper that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Her breath was warm against my skin, and for a moment we just stayed like that, close enough to feel each other's heartbeats. "This is dangerous, Lucas," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your dad." I shook my head, cutting her off. "He's never here, Helen. It's just us most of the time." Her lips parted as if to say something, but she hesitated. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the struggle between what she knew was right and what she felt in her heart. "This isn't just about him," she finally said. "It's about us, about what this means." I reached for her hand and intertwined my fingers with hers. "It doesn't have to mean anything, Helen. It's just us, right here, right now." Her eyes softened and she let out a shaky breath. "You make it sound so easy." "Maybe it is," I said, running my thumb gently over her knuckles. She studied me for a moment, her expression unreadable, and then she leaned in again, her lips finding mine with a newfound determination. This kiss was different, deeper, more intense, as if she'd finally let go of the barrier she'd been holding onto. Her hands moved to the back of my neck, pulling me closer as her body pressed against mine. I could feel the warmth of her skin. I dragged my hands towards her chest, pressing it gently, and started kissing. "Lucas," she murmured against my lips, her voice trembling. "Yeah." Her hands trailed down my shoulders, her touch sending shivers through me. "We shouldn't." "But we are," I said, cutting her off again,